Hi, ninth grade. Here to continue reading. And we're in a place where they realize they cannot continue to climb. So they start down and then they realize they're in avalanche territory and they will be in an avalanche. And then they decide to turn around and go back. And that's where we are. It hurt to listen to him, still determined to get on his feet and climb the mountain. But who knows, Houston thought, maybe he was right. Houston made the rounds and they all decided to wait another day to move. If they were lucky, the weather would improve and Gilkey would be able to help himself get himself down. The chance was slim, but at this point, they would take anything. According to Molinar, they were all losing strength fast. Our present battle, he wrote, is against altitude-caused deterioration and against the constant threat of frostbite. The entire team had been at 25,000 feet for more than a week. No one had been that high for that long, and doctors were just beginning to understand the risk. The headaches climbers get lower on the mountain can turn into cerebral edema, in which pressure builds around the brain. That pressure can scramble the brain's signals to the limbs. More common is pulmonary edema, in which the lungs fill with fluid and can drown a climber in a matter of hours. In both cases, the only cure is to descend fast. Just that year, the Swiss doctor Weiss Dunant had invented the term death zone to describe what happens to human life at extreme altitudes. Survival is the only term suitable for describing the behavior of a man in that mortal zone. Weiss Dunant wrote, "Life hangs by a thread to such a point that the organism, exhausted by the ascent, can pass in a few hours from a somnolent state to a white death. It is now no longer a question of adaptation, but only of the number of days or hours allotted to the strongest person." D. Molinar had no idea how many days or hours they each had left, but he began to have a disturbing thought. If the time came when he had to climb or die, would he have the willpower to act? He could feel the altitude wearing away his desire to get out of the tent in the morning. It was partly physical. Just to sit up and light a stove made his heart race and his lungs heave. But it was mental too. Trapped in the tents at 25,000 feet, he suddenly understood the final days of Dudley Wolf's life, played out somewhere on the ice slope just below their camp. He could imagine seeing Kukuli, Finsu, and Qatar at the tent door, and knowing somewhere deep inside that if he didn't get out of his sleeping bag, find his boots, and descend with them, he would die alone, 9,000 miles from home. He could imagine knowing all of this and still saying to himself, "I prefer not. Instead, I will pull my sleeping bag tight under my chin and stay right here." The next day, Houston poked his head into the tent where Molinar, Bell, and Craig lay shoulder to shoulder. He crawled in, bringing a spray of fine white powder with him. Outside, the wind howled and snow came down in solid sheets of white. Houston asked how they were feeling. Then he delivered the bad news. He had just come from Gilkey's tent. During the night, Art had developed a dry, hacking cough. And when Houston listened to Gilkey's breathing, his heart sank. At least 2 blood clots had passed into Gilkey's lungs. At this altitude, he didn't have long to live. They would have to get him down first thing tomorrow. Tears welled up in Molinar's eyes. He hadn't gotten to know Art as well as he would have liked. Gilkey was quiet and serious, and if Molinar was the voice of caution on the expedition, Gilkey was his foil. Always a vote for pushing higher. But Art was a hard-working teammate, eager to carry loads and pitch tents. His desire to climb was pure. It was hard to bear listening to him cough in the next tent, knowing he probably wouldn't make it down alive. But with that thought, Molinar let his mind drift to another place, a place the others had surely gone as well. Terrible thought that perhaps our getting down safely depends on Art's early passing, he wrote. Oh God, save me from such thoughts. Later, Molinar sat down to write what he thought might be his last letter to Lee. It was August 9th, Patty's birthday. The situation right now looks as desperate as any I've ever experienced, he began. He talked about how each of his teammates and the bond they developed since leaving New York so many weeks ago. We all feel strong obligations to each other, depend so much on each other that there's no thought of every man for himself in this desperate plight, he wrote. We all come down, or else. The or else sounded so final it sent him spiraling into despair. He felt like a condemned man, thinking about Lee and Patty waiting for him back in Seattle. He was praying for the strength to make it down alive. I wish I was with you and Patty, a lovely little girl, who I want so much to be with more and still hope to. That brought him up short, and he wrote one final line. God, what a depressing letter. An obituary or something, which I certainly don't plan on yet. We have so much to live for. All the praying and hoping for 3 clear days had gotten them nothing. August 10th was as bad as any day they'd seen on the mountain, the wind raging and snow blowing sideways through the air. But today they had no choice. Food and fuel was almost gone. Gilkey was dying. They had to get off the mountain. They repeated the preparations of 3 days ago. Tent struck, sleeping bags packed, Gilkey wrapped tight. He looked warm, bundled inside a sleeping bag in a tent, his feet stuffed in a rucksack. Houston had moved in with Gilkey the day before and given him morphine for the pain. In the tent, Gilkey was as eager as ever. He apologized for burdening everyone. As soon as they got down, he told Houston the rest of the team should make another try for the summit. Now, as they wrapped Gilkey in his cocoon, someone asked, "How are you?" Just fine, he said. With everything packed, Houston made a final call to Atta. It's pretty desperate, he reported, but we can't wait. We're starting down now. We'll call you at 3 o'clock. In the driving snow, they left the remains of their camp behind. Molinar and Schoening went ahead to scout the route, hugging the rock run on the right. Bates and Houston stayed high, anchored to Gilkey by a rope. Slowly, they lowered the cocoon down the slope. Craig descended alongside Gilkey, guiding him through the snow and shouting instructions up the mountain. Struther, with Bell belaying him from above, climbed halfway down so he could relay messages above the deafening sound of the wind. For a couple of hours, they moved this way, the wind biting through jackets and gloves. They found the rock rim and headed down along its edge. Houston and Bates dug themselves into the slope with the ropes wrapped around their hips. Slowly, they paid out rope, lowering Gilkey 120 feet until the slack ran out. Then they climbed down one by one, keeping Art anchored until they could start again down the narrow gully of snow. They had reached the steepest pitch when Struther, from his perch in the middle, saw the rope scrape the fresh snow above Craig and Gilkey. Just as he started to yell a warning, the snow loosened and avalanched down the slope. Craig and Gilkey disappeared in a white cloud. Above the avalanche, Houston and Bates felt the rope tighten. They leaned back into the slope and gripped the rope with frost-nipped hands. Everything below vanished. Then they heard Strather yell up to them, "Hold him! He's on the edge of the cliff." I'm going to stop there in the middle of page 192. I can't imagine, as I read this book and the perils, the absolute terror of their expedition, it is truly hard for me to imagine myself being at 24,000 feet. I've been at 12,500 feet, so I've been at 12,500. But being at 28,000 feet in this weather, it's very hard to imagine. I hope you're enjoying this book, and I hope if you haven't been keeping up, that you'll go back and read. It's a very compelling and true story. Thanks so much, ninth grade. See you next time. Take care of yourselves.